Leonard Leo. I didn't realize this, but the guy's basically like my age. And he is the founder of the Federalist Society. And I didn't realize, or one of the founders, right, of the Federalist Society. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say, but by the way, you definitely look younger than he does, Sam.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for, Andy. I appreciate that. I think he's a year older than me. He's a year older than me, but I remember all this. I mean,
your head of hair, the beard, just you've got to beat in that department. Trust me.
Well, thank you. That's what I.
All right, Andy, quit it.
I had to butter him up a little bit.
There you go.
So Leonard Leo, I mean, I've come to think of him as the most important person in American politics that almost everybody hasn't heard of. He came up through the Federalist Society. He wasn't a co-founder exactly, but he was one of the earliest employees. And he's the guy who saw the Federalist Society as more than just like a intellectual debating club for conservative law students who felt like they were, outcasts or besieged or whatever. He believed that the Federalist Society could be a political juggernaut. It could be the engine to churn out future Scalias, future Clarence Thomases, future judges, future attorneys general, not just of the U.S., but of every state in the nation. His imprint on certainly the American legal system, but I would say even bigger than that, American politics writ large, is it's hard to wrap your arms around. I mean, that's why this story we wrote is so dang long. And, we took 3 hours of podcasts as well to tell his story. I really think people need to know it. It's when you know about him and you see what he's done in the world, both in the federal level and the state level, a lot of things start to make sense that didn't make sense before you recognize him.
The thing that really strikes me about the Federalist Society is, and I think I've been having conversations about the Federalist Society for 20 years, really, on air regarding like what they have that the left doesn't have. And I've seen it grow. And for me, the fundamental story about specifically about the Federalist Society, it is like, it functions as sort of as a placement like service, and it becomes self-perpetuating, where there is nothing even remotely like this on the left. There has been attempts with the American Constitution Society, but that has really, I think, in many respects, failed in that regard. But explain this dynamic, and then we'll get into how it developed.
Yeah, it is exactly what you describe: a placement service, a talent pipeline, a training academy. I mean, you can use a baseball analogy if you want and think of it as a farm system where, if you get all the way to the top, you're the Supreme Court, but there are a lot of other great teams to play on below the Supreme Court in this tortured metaphor. But it's more than that too, though. I mean, the other really key insight we had is, in the 90s, the Leonard Leos of the world, the conservative legal activists, have this crisis moment where 3 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court write an opinion in a case called Casey versus Pennsylvania that essentially upholds Roe v. Wade. This is a case, again, that was written, the majority opinion was written by O'Connor, Souter, and Kennedy, all Republican appointees, all expected to be with the conservatives on this issue of reproductive rights, and they are not. And so what the Federalist Society also does is it is a sort of intellectual hothouse for these young law students and lawyers and judges. It is a place where they can, hang out, they go to their conferences, they do their networking, blah, blah, blah. But the ideology, the legal doctrine is, if it's not enforced, it's certainly a sort of bubble for them where you won't have that problem of a David Souter in the future going soft on you or drifting to the left. I mean, the rallying cry in this crowd was no more Souters. The Federalist Society was the place where these people would go to try to prevent against that intellectual legal drift. So it's not just putting them in the jobs. It's also making sure before they get the jobs, and then when they get those jobs, that they don't drift toward the center, toward the left, like Seder did.
So it vets, but it also disciplines and keeps people within that narrow, so that it got to the critical mass where he could put people in jobs. And that would mean, that's not just like judgeships in terms of, it's state deputy solicitors. Yep. It is, state deputy attorney generals all across the country. He got to the point where he could put people in jobs, and having the Federalist Society moniker imprimatur was a job benefit. Now it's basically a requirement.
Yeah.
But it also means that, to be in good standing in the Federalist Society, you need to prove that you're willing to make certain decisions at certain points and show within that organization. It's like there's a hazing almost. There's like, it's like we don't really have, it's a combination of a lot of different things that is really hard to point to a perfect analogy in our society, because we don't really have something like that.
It's hard to put your finger on it. I mean, ideological conformity is a part of it. Some of it is just like soothing these people, when they're judges and they feel like, the liberals are treating them in a bad way. They're mean to them when they go out for dinner or whatever. They can always retreat back to the Federalist Society chapters, the Federalist Society National Conference, which is like nerd prom for conservative lawyers, and feel safe. And that wasn't there before. I don't think the left took it seriously for a really long time. Didn't take it seriously until it was too late, thinking, oh, well, they have their dinners, they have these debates, so isn't that nice? But like, that doesn't affect us in any way. Why would we do that? Until all of a sudden it was, the Bush administration first, and then absolutely the Trump administration fully outsourced the judicial process to the Federalist Society. And then the liberals were like, oh, crap, that's what this was. And we don't have anything like this. And we're 20 years behind.
But it wasn't part of it too, though, it seems to me, is that to acknowledge that a society, a function like that can exist within the law, that judges are getting up there with a prescribed sort of like a menu as to how they're going to rule on things. To me, it wasn't just that the political left didn't acknowledge it. It was that the legal institution, and I'm still not convinced that they fully accept this. I don't think they can, because it fundamentally undermines the sort of like fiction that much of the classical legal thought is obligated to buy into, which is judges just look at the facts and the law, and they're not politicians. It's not political. And in fact, it is. And all of the fact that Leo could have done this is indicative of that fact that nobody wanted to actually recognize and reconcile with.
We talked to Carolyn Fredrickson, who ran the American Constitution Society for a while, and in her own begrudging way, she was impressed with what Leo had built. And, she said, and we quote her in the story saying this, is the right saw the courts as a political machine in a way that the left never did, or did far too late. Again, if it did at all. And there just isn't someone in the history books that we could find who had this insight in the way that Leo did. And also in the way that they use these ideas of originalism and textualism, sort of cloaked them in theory and history and scholarship and so on, when really they did also serve a very clear political purpose. They absolutely aligned with the political and policy priorities of the sort of libertarian corporate economic types, the Kochs, the Christian right, the Catholic right. I mean, this was very, very convenient for them that they could say, oh, it's all about the theory and the idea and the faithfulness of the Constitution, but also it accomplishes everything that we want to accomplish on a policy side, economics and otherwise. So, and again, the left just, I don't think, paid attention or really thought hard about all of these things until Donald Trump is saying, the Federalist Society is picking on my judges. Isn't that great? And it was basically like the good housekeeping stamp of approval for his presidential campaign back in 2016.
But I feel like when Feingold became the ACS president, there was an awareness and there was an attempt, and maybe it was even during the Obama years, where there was an attempt to recreate this sort of same dynamic where the imprimatur of the ACS would help you get confirmation as a judge. And I think it was like Lou, I can't remember his first name, who was prevented from getting on the federal bench, or maybe it was and the ACS moniker actually became perceived, if not necessarily a benefit, but a liability. Like there is not the same network and frankly the same money that teams through this, because if you have that kind of money, you're going to want judges who are going to rule ultimately in your favor more often than not. And there's sort of like a conflict there, and it becomes the most naked, it seems to me, within the context of the judiciary. But people really should read this to understand that how that network worked, and like it's so businessy and corporate, and it's, you know, you could use the you could use, it seems to me like you could translate in this to like a small town where like somebody's going to be I work for the United Way, or I'm sitting on this board and that board and I'm creating these networks, and it's all networking essentially, but with one specific agenda in mind.